I do want to start by noting, while your experience is the unthinkable, I think we all can recognize that it's not unbelievable,
Yes.
especially in the climate of the way that the judicial system, the court systems, and the prison systems disproportionately affect young black men.
Yes, indeed.
So I want you to go back to the days when this was happening, okay? And talk to us about what you were going through in the early stages of your incarceration. Tell us about the feelings. Were you angry? Were you hopeless? Were you determined?
You know, I think that when I look back, the only way that I can describe it is it felt like I was in a live nightmare. Not able to wake up, not able to shake myself free from it, wondering and hoping and praying that someday the truth was going to come out, someday that they were going to be able to at least see that we had not done this. You know, you look at this case and the initial phases of it weren't something that we were supposed to survive from. This was something that was going to guarantee that we either died in prison or if we somehow survived, that we were given a social death.
And so during your time in prison, I understand that there was a conversation that you had with someone,
Yes.
a guard actually.
Oh, yes.
Can you share with us what that conversation was and what impact it had during your time there?
You know, I think about that often. The individual, this officer that walked up to me one day, about 6 months into my prison bid, he says, "Who are you?" His name was Jerome Jones. And ignorantly, I answered him by saying, "I'm Yusef Salaam, one of the guys that they accused of raping a Central Park jogger, but I didn't do it." And to my surprise, he says, "I know that. You're not supposed to be here. I've been watching you. Why are you here? Who are you?" And it caused me to think about things from this very philosophical position of, you know, being born, finding purpose in life, and all of those things that you're always told about from elders. And I remember saying to myself, man, I never knew what the meaning of my name meant. I always thought that it meant Joseph, because people used to say that when I was growing up. From that question, I found out that when I was born, instead of a baby shower, my mother and my father, as part of the culture, had a baby naming ceremony. And in the ceremony, 7 days after I was born, they revealed to the world who I was. They told people that my name was to be Yusef Idris Fadil Abdus Salam. And that name means God will increase the teacher with justice and peace. Now, I found this out in prison. I didn't know the meaning of my name. So in prison, I'm like, wow, this is really interesting and amazing to find out that I think I'm supposed to do something. I think I've been chosen to fulfill something, and this is the means. And so now prison became something very different for me. It became a place that I'm in a cocoon, and I'm making sure that I keep my mind as free as possible and make sure that I'm not mentally in bondage as my body is. And it was one of the, strangely enough, one of the most amazing experiences that I can ever imagine. You know, folks always ask me, would you ever go back and change anything if you could? Changing one thing in the past would disrupt the future. And when I look back, I realize that there's a path. I can see the path. While I was going through it, I probably had to take out a machete or a weed whacker and chop all the way through this heavy, condensed life that I was experiencing. But God is good. God is real good.
I'm interested more in the experience that you had when you shared that you had to work to protect your mind. Can you just give us an example of some of the things that you would do to help?
Oh, absolutely. You know, when you think about it, all of us have negative self-talk going on in my mind. So, you know, as young people in particular, you know, when I look at my younger self, here I was 14, 15, and 16 years old. And young people are always told, you know, you're not worth anything, or, you know, slow down, or don't do this or don't do that, when God is the one that gave you life. And so God said, be, and therefore you are. And here it was, I had to really wrestle with the challenges of hearing in my mind that I was a criminal, that I should just succumb to this new reality that was placed on me. You know, when in the 13th Amendment, you have clearly stated that for the punishment of a crime, they can turn you back into a slave. When I read that, I knew that I had to refuse. I had to literally say no, because I knew that if I didn't, then time would do me, as opposed to me doing time. I had to then project myself into my own future so that my future self would thank me for doing whatever it was that I was doing at that present moment. So all this time, I was just like really concerned with how protected my mind was. I was looking at myself a lot of times vicariously through my own eyes. I would kind of do a separation of myself and look at myself and realize that all of the inmates that were in the prison that I was in revered me. They looked up to me. They asked me questions about spiritual processes and things of that nature. They cared about me. They protected me. Prison was not what you could have imagined prison to be for me. When you look at the series When They See Us, the polar opposite of a story of Corey Wise, you know, and Corey never deserved that. He never should have been in prison. But he somehow became the magic ingredient that not only freed us, but freed himself as well. Very, very powerful.
Very profound. And continuing along the lines, because I want everyone here to reflect that you all were boys, right?
Yes.
There are a group of boys here actually from a high school, and you all were determined to achieve your education.
Yes.
So why was it important to you, and how did you accomplish getting your GED and college degree while incarcerated?
You know, when I was in prison, one of the things that helped me along was my mother. She would write me letters, my grandmother would write me letters, and they would always be encouraging me to do something, you know, to cast down your bucket. This didn't happen just by happenstance. There's a greater purpose in it. And I'll never forget, my grandmother in particular, she would write letters to me, and on the letters, she would address me in these words: to Master Yusef Salaam. Now imagine me now looking back at that and realizing that not only did the officers have to read that, because the mail has to be passed through. They got to read everything before it gets to the inmates. But they're reading to Master Yusef Salaam. And not only that, more importantly, is I'm reading that. It was somehow magically being told to me that I needed to straighten my back, that I needed to make something out of this situation, that this is not the end of my story. And the natural thing to do next was to try to get a GED. I was in the 11th grade. I started school early. And so when I got my GED, the more powerful thing, I think, really over and above getting a GED, was finding out that I could do it. Finding out that I could believe in myself, that I had the resiliency to push past whatever it was that was being presented in front of me. That when they came and brought college into the prison, that we not only passed every class, but we thrived. We were on the dean's list. We were getting so good grades that it was initially the associate's program. Then we graduated. And they said, hey, we're going to bring the next phase in and let you guys get bachelor's degrees. And then they took education out of the prison. But the benefit to where I was and how I had been moving was that I was always able to continue educating myself through reading books, through meditating, through connecting with people. It was a tremendously powerful experience.
Wow. And again, I think I'm struck by the capacity that you had to really challenge yourself in your mind to keep yourself in a place where you were pursuing goals while still not knowing if this conviction would be turned.
Right.
I'm curious about adversity, right? We're talking a lot about resiliency today. And so how would you say that you handle adversity today with comparison to that young boy back then? Any differences?
I think the biggest difference is knowing that what happens in life Whatever hits you will never miss you. And whatever misses you, you can never get. There's a certain calmness in your heart when you realize that. There's a peace of mind that comes to know that your portion is guaranteed. All you have to do is begin to do the work. You will appear to have a lucky life, as I was telling some youngsters earlier. And luck stands for laboring under correct knowledge. You will appear to be fearless when fear also is an acronym that stands for false evidence appearing real. And when you know these things, you can conquer anything. I mean, you push forward in life and you say to yourself, how do you get more? How do you give more? The most important thing in your life is the dash between your birth and your death. My friend Les Brown says, don't leave this world without a trace. Leave your mark in it. Don't be on your deathbed and you see all of the ghosts of all of the dreams and aspirations and the hopes and the wishes being around your deathbed, knowing that you were the only one that could give it life. And just because you didn't give it life, they're going to the grave with you. So you have to live full and die empty. And I think that that's the most important part of it, taking the light that is inside of you and turning it up. You know, I wrote in my book called Words of a Man, My Right to Be. It's a poetry book. I wrote in there that when you find yourself in so-called dark places, there's always a light somewhere in the darkness. And oftentimes that light is inside you. And you can illuminate your own darkness and shine your light on the world.
Wow. You often speak to young people about living in their purpose. And can you explain more about what you mean by that? And how can that idea help someone achieve resilience?
So young people have coined this term called YOLO. I have 10 children, so when I first heard this term, I was like, hey, what does that term mean? I have 7 girls and 3 boys. And my daughter, who I was asking this question of, she looked at me and said, Dad, you only live once. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. So now when I'm in front of young people, I say, yeah, YOLO, you know? But what I understood about YOLO, which was very interesting, was that wrapped in this understanding of where young people see themselves in life is they find themselves looking at life and saying it's hopeless. There is no need to prepare for tomorrow. So in the YOLO understanding, drink every drink that you can get your hands on. Live a reckless life, as reckless as you can possibly live. But I'm telling young people to think about yourself in the words or in the space of a Nipsey Hussle. Project yourself into your own future. So you have to see yourself as your past, present, future self. To know that if you talk to your future self, what would your future self say to you that would thank you for what you did right now? And as we move in life, we have to know. We have to know this beyond a shadow of a doubt, that we were born on purpose. We were born on purpose because when our mother and father got together, every single one of us was over one of 400 million options, all racing to the egg. Another option could have been chosen, but you came out, I came out, we came out. And so we look at that and we realize that wrapped into our being born on purpose is our purpose in this world. When I look back at my life, it becomes so apparent that I was born for this. I was chosen specifically to grow through this experience so that 30 years later I could be fearless. 30 years later I could tell young people, you too can go free. You too can make something of yourself. You too can take lemons that life gives you and make lemonade. And then look cool. Start juggling those lemons. I mean, it's so important because if we look at a life of a Nipsey Hussle, our grandparents have always said to us things like, you reap what you sow. Nipsey Hussle is planting seeds in the future. Those trees that will grow from those seeds, he'll never sit under the shade of. But his children's children will. All of the people that he was trying to help will be able to sit under the shade of those trees. And that's something that we have to understand too. We too are planting seeds in our future. We too will reap what we sow. We too have the ability to make sure that the future is alive and well, especially as dare I say, elders, right? I'm 45 years young. But as a person coming up to the middle point of my life, I feel like there's so much that I can give back. There's so much information that I can share. You know, when I was younger, I would always look up to the OGs, as they were called. These were just 20-year-olds, still trying to figure life out. But we always wanted to know what made them so cool. But looking at my life, being able to let a young person know that when you hear those negative self-talk, those negative things that are going on in your mind, you can spark positivity by flipping it. So if you hear yourself saying, man, I'm not worthy, say, I am the most worthy. Say, I am. Whatever you give birth, whatever you say after I am, you give birth to. And so in prison, I found out that when we were passing those grades, when we were getting on the dean's list, I was like, man, I'm actually smart. Imagine that in prison, finding out that in the most damned of places, that prison is now becoming a womb. I read a piece of poetry once that said, prison life in many ways can be likened to the womb. If the life inside becomes stillborn, the womb becomes the tomb. I didn't want to become stillborn. I did not want to die in prison, even a spiritual death, definitely not a physical death. And so this place became a place where I was able to take all of the tools that were given to me, especially spiritual tools, and make sure that I would come out of here a warrior.
Talk about determination. So I want to point out something that I'm sure a lot of you have heard about, but I'm a New York resident.
Yes.
So in New York City, actually today, the city council is meeting to sign a plan to close Rikers Prison by 2026. And so I'm curious, first of all, your reaction to this, and do you think this indicates that there is a possibility or evidence of change to what I understand that you call the criminal system of injustice?
Well, first of all, I would definitely commend New York for doing what they're doing. What I look at, though, I think, is the reality that we face. The reason why I mentioned the reason why I mentioned the 13th Amendment is because as an outgrowth of what we knew as the emancipation of slaves, they then began to institute things like the slave codes or the new Jim Crow stuff that we figured out has morphed into what we see as policing in America. And so above closing a place like Rikers Island, I think it's more important not to create new Rikers Island in the municipalities or the states or the cities that these folks are coming from. We have to take a deep dive and really understand that the system is operating exactly as it was designed. They've taken coded language as a part of the founding documents of this country and said, we are going to make sure that slavery continues through the 13th Amendment. Anybody can read that. But when black and brown folks read those words, it vibrates differently with us. They're talking about a reality that happened. And then we look at the prison industrial complex and we see that the overwhelming landscape is representative of people who look like me. That's a problem. That's a huge problem. I think it was Michael Moore who did this study in a film, and he was talking about what does policing look like around the globe and how we as America can get information that will help us to humanize humans. Humanize humans, right? They looked at us as what we were known as the Central Park Five and made us into pariahs. People began to write us hate mail. People looked at us and said, this is the scum of the earth. Donald Trump paid for ad space in New York City's newspapers, basically putting a bounty on our heads. The ad ran in big, bold headlines that said, bring back the death penalty, bring back our police. People began to then say, oh, it's okay for us we can go there, it's okay. And one in particular was a guy named Pat Buchanan who wrote in the papers, why don't we just take the eldest one, Corey Wise, and hang him from a tree in Central Park? This was written in the New York Post. And then why don't we take the others and strip them naked and horsewhip them? Mind you, Donald Trump's ad ran 2 weeks after we were accused. 2 weeks after we were accused. We were already seen as guilty and having to prove ourselves innocent. They then stepped further into the muck and said, let's just publish their names, phone numbers, and addresses in New York City's newspapers. You're talking about 14, 15, and 16-year-old children. The tsunami of everything that came down upon us, we weren't supposed to survive. But when you come out on the other end and you look back, now you have a story to tell. Now you understand this from a completely different vantage point. A friend of mine in prison who had told me that he was also innocent of the crime that he had been convicted of. I met him in Clinton, Dannemora. He had already done about 12 years in prison. He gave me a piece of poetry called The Blank Canvas. And in this piece of work, he said, use this for yourself, but I don't like to use, when people give me something, I'm gonna attribute it to exactly who it came from. And in this piece of work, it simply says, each of us are born into this world like a blank canvas. And everybody that comes across our path takes their brush and leaves a mark on our surface. And this is how we grow. But there comes a time that we have to pick up our own brush and determine who and what we will be. Just another painting or a masterpiece? Yeah.
So we are out of time. I wish we could continue. But I would like to get your final thought on resiliency, not just from the individual perspective, but in this room that's diverse and represents the fabric of America, how can Americans achieve resiliency with the type of issues that we're looking at today?
Perhaps I will sum that up with a poem.
Okay.
The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be televised. I can remember when that statement made me sad inside, too young to be in it. Now I couldn't even see it. Why? Why couldn't the revolution be televised? The last poets, Gil Scott-Heron. As I grew up, I began to see. They left theirs, and I too wanted to leave a mark on history. A man in half, and I wanted to bask in that task that set men free. But a revolution, the revolution, is where I knew I had to be. The revolution will not be televised. They didn't want to display the victory of those quote-unquote lesser men. The revolution will not be televised. Smile, I know, because I am the revolution. Thank you.